So you're here for How Your Future Could Include Employment. It's a workshop for young adults. It's part of a three-part series created through Employment First in Michigan. And a national expert, Sean Roy, put these together. He put two presentations together. And then DD Council created a project called YAY, Youth Employment Ambassador Host. And so we had the young adults create a third portion of employment presentations. So it's youth presenting to youth typically. I don't fall in the youth category, I'm told, but we won't get into that right now. But we wanted to have you have a little bit of background on how we came to this particular presentation. So first, before we get going, I want you to meet your presenters.
So, my name is Jeffrey Van Dyke, and as you can see, I am a wheelchair user, which was a result of the fact that I was born with a condition known as cerebral palsy due to a medical emergency. I grew up in the area of Muskegon, Michigan, and attended Muskegon Public Schools throughout my entire education career. And as an individual who grew up and came up through the public school system, I'm also familiar with how the system has worked, or in many cases has not worked, to support people in inclusive jobs. Throughout that, I'm also passionate about making a positive difference wherever possible, and I have been a driving force for positive change through sharing my journey to employment as well as experiences of life with a disability on several occasions, presenting to the community. I also serve in the role of peer mentor, graphics designer, and social media manager for Disability Network West Michigan. When I'm not doing that, you will also find me serving on the board for the Michigan Victory Games. I am a multi-sport wheelchair athlete and have served as an assistant wheelchair basketball coach. And when I'm not working, you can generally find me doing something to exercise my creativity artistically.
Hi, everyone. I am Mary Sheehan. Thank you, Jeff. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Community Inclusion Coordinator for the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council, and I'm lead staff for the Council's initiatives on supported decision-making, person-centered planning, and sexuality education, as well as expanding employment for youth. I've been a sexuality educator for over 40 years, and I've been teaching using the Elevatus training curriculum and involved in Employment First in Michigan since its onset. Much of my knowledge, though, comes not from my training as a psychologist or my work as an advocate, but that as the bratty little sister. I have a brother that has been diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, so I've learned a lot over the years on working as his bratty little sister to advocate for him for the things he needs, as well as my aunt with Down syndrome and my other biological brother with closed head injury. So we'll talk about those experiences throughout the presentation. So again, anybody who walked in a little late, the in code, if you're here for CEUs, is 49, and we will move on.
So this slide is titled Today's Learning Objectives. Why are we talking about employment? So this is basically why we're here. Employment plays an important role in everyone's life, regardless of disability status. However, we, the disabled population, have had a limited opportunities for meaningful jobs in the community, but that is changing. What we want to do today is talk about the reasons why employment is important, how things are changing for the better, and share tools to help people with IDD, see themselves employed in the community. We understand that many youth may not be thinking about their future for various reasons, but it is important for people with disabilities to begin planning early for their jobs. So we will be asking some key questions along the way, and request that you use the worksheets provided to organize your thoughts and answers. So let's get started. The the PowerPoint for this presentation, along with the handouts, have been uploaded to the conference page, and we'll often refer to those as they come up in the agenda. For now, you can get ready to use handout 1, a positive personal profile. It's a blank form.
Okay. So the form Jeff is referring to looks like this, and it is uploaded onto the conference webpage. So typically when we do this presentation in person, we have those available for everyone, and we'll stop at various times and ask you to kind of think about one of those squares and answer that question. So if you're here as a person with an intellectual or developmental disability, you want to fill that out and think about your life and your experiences and what you're looking for your career. If you're here as a parent, think about the young adult in your life who might be getting ready to explore employment. If you're a professional here, think about one person that you currently work with and kind of have that person in mind as you explore these concepts. So again, you can get that handout ready. What we want you to think about right now is that first question. Okay, I'm going to make this a little larger here. So how do you plan to make money in your future? So when Sean Roy first created this, it was worded differently. And the youth, when they came to redoing this presentation, thinking about youth presenting to youth in school settings, they took out all the fancy words and, how do you plan to make money? Show me the money. So think about that question for one person that you work with. What do you think their plan is for making money in their future? Or if you're here with lived experience, how do you plan on making money in your future? So we would have you work and fill that out to have an idea in mind as we progress in the presentation.
So this slide is titled Today, People with Disabilities. So as I mentioned, things are, in the previous slide, things are beginning to change. And this slide is included to show that people living with disabilities are now living a more complete existence, which includes more opportunities to be meaningful employed, have friends, families, own their own home, engage in hobbies of their choosing, and be respected members of their community, which is essentially the foundation for the rest of our presentation. Today, people with all types of disabilities are working in their communities in a wide variety of jobs. Many students with disabilities even have a better chance to attend college or trade school to prepare for jobs. We see people living and working independently using a wide range of accommodations and supports, which can include flexible schedules, accommodations in the workplace, assisted technology, job coaching through supported employment, owning homes, having families, and living their lives and planning for their jobs the way they want. Families, self-advocates, disability advocates, and policymakers are all working together to break down the walls that once kept people with disabilities from being fully included in society. As part of the work we've done with the council, we have created a video highlighting a few families and their employment journeys, which we will be watching a little later today. In addition to this, we have also worked with the state on some TV, radio, and social media commercials to highlight the active employment of persons with disabilities. And these links will be able to be viewed as a resource at the end of the session.
I'm going to go back to that last slide just for a moment. So all these pictures show people right here in Michigan doing, living life, doing day-to-day activities. And that's real different from the 1960s when I grew up. So I just kind of gave you a clue about my age. That's why I don't fall into the whole youth category thing. But things looked very different back then. And so now we have people graduating with, diplomas and going on to continuing education in some way, colleges. We have people working in inclusive jobs in the community. We have a mental health organization that's providing commercials about hiring people with intellectual and developmental disabilities for community integrated jobs. So things are looking different. So again, a lot of times we hear these things and we think, well, that doesn't really happen in our state. This does happen in our state. Again, these are all young adults right here in the state of Michigan. So, despite that there's been lots of changes and everything that Jeff said is correct, things have changed tremendously since my brother and I were growing up. There's still a long way to go before young adults with disabilities experience equality or equity of opportunity in the United States. It'd be unrealistic to report that people with significant disabilities have achieved full equality of opportunity in this country. Employment rates for people with disability are still significantly lower than those without disabilities. Many people are in danger of living at a poverty level and have limited housing options in many areas. They may experience a lack of social relationships or recreational outlets. At times, they are ignored as potential contributors to their communities. This inequality of opportunities ultimately leads to individuals who lack the ability to determine their own futures. This is what we are fighting to change, and promoting meaningful employment for all is a place to start. So when we think about these things that have changed, we need to also be cognizant of not repeating the past and continually working to change each day for better lives for people with disabilities of all kinds. Go ahead, Sarah.
But there are problems like people getting SSI and Social Security.
Yeah, we're going to actually talk about that a little later in the presentation, Sarah. That's okay. We have a whole video on this idea of people who have public benefits and how those benefits and work can come together to increase the livelihood for people. So we'll talk a little bit more about it. If we don't answer your specific question about it then, raise your hand again, okay? All right, so on this slide, we're talking about employment equals equality, or what I prefer the word equity of opportunity. What we are trying to do is help young adults to see value in employment. We are trying to help young adults see that work is possible. The same kind of work for every person is not possible, is not maybe desired, but some sort of work is possible for every person. Offer information, what we are trying to do again, offer information on resources so young adults can make informed decisions. What we're not trying to do is take away anything from young adults, their families, or people with disabilities. We're not trying to put people with disabilities at risk. And we're not trying to push people into programs they don't want. So why did we put on this workshop for young adults and for families and for professionals? What we want to accomplish is to provide you with a respectful discussion and reliable information about competitive work and the importance of considering that as an option for people. Even those with significant, who are more highly impacted by their disabilities. Often the phrase more profoundly impacted by their disabilities is used. We want to show that work has value, that work is possible for people with all types of disabilities, and to connect people with resources to help answer questions they may have. We are not trying to get you to do something you're not comfortable with, to take anything away from you, or to disrupt the plans you have in place. As we go through the information, we'll encourage you to keep an open mind and to think honestly about the lives you wish to live yourselves, or for your loved one, or for those you work with.
So the next slide is titled Employment, So Much is Possible. So now that we have discussed about why we're here, let's spend a little time discussing the concept of employment itself. And it's important for us to be on the same page with what should be considered.
So here we want to talk about making sure that we all have an understanding about the current efforts to promote employment equality and equity. Current thinking and practices reflect desire to offer all people, including young adults, the choice for how and where they choose to work. Legislation ensures competitive work is considered before sheltered work. Many Michigan employment providers focusing efforts on community-based employment rather than sheltered workshops. Increased focus on preparing students with disabilities for successful employment. So when we think about people with disabilities, we want to start with the base of all people have value. Part of being valued is having the same opportunities as everyone else. Here are some ways this country, including the state of Michigan, is providing employment opportunities for people with disabilities. Decades of advocacy, policy, and legislation have been slowly working toward the goal of equality or equity of employment opportunity in this country. When we look at even statistics that came out just this morning, and I was reading them this morning, people with visual impairment are recovering employment statistics, employment rates, slower than individuals with other disabilities following COVID. We know employment rates decreased during COVID, but the recovery is happening even more slowly. And we're starting just now to see some improvements in that. So people with disabilities are impacted at every level of employment in ways different than the neurotypical population. As years roll on, what we understand as being best practices have changed, and so have the services that we offer to support people with disabilities. In the 1980s, I was just graduating high school then, many states turned to sheltered workshops as a standard of employment services for people with significant disabilities. Now, as we near 2024 and beyond, we have a better understanding of the impact that sheltered workshops have. For example, in the past, many students with disabilities were put into sheltered settings without getting a chance to explore jobs in their community. In addition, people who have been in sheltered workshop settings for a long time had not previously been given the option to get out. As we speak to young adults and their families around the state about opportunities found in competitive employment, it's important to understand where we have been and where we are going. So it's critical that we continue to look at legislation, we continue to look at advocacy, and we continue to have people with disabilities, young adults, be at the table as part of this conversation.
So next up we have employment, the core concepts. So first and foremost, everyone can work. Disability may impact a person in a variety of ways. For some, disability has a significant impact on communication, mobility, and cognitive function. However, people with all types of disabilities can continue to be successful in the workplace. This is possible with the right supports and with high expectations. Later in the session, we will see some of the remarkable success stories that show great things are possible. Second on the list, we have work looks differently for everybody. You may be concerned that you might not be able to work a 40-hour work week or in a fast-paced environment, doing difficult tasks. However, the secret is to start small. For some youth, working 5 to 10 hours a week is a great start, and granted, not all jobs might be appropriate right away, but there are effective employment programs that can help customize jobs and for all skill levels and interests. The point of employment success should be measured on an individual basis and not what others can do. Last but not least on this list, we have employment should be rooted in what you want to do. We want to find happiness and fulfillment in all areas of our lives. Unfortunately, people with significant disabilities too often have little say in what happens in their life. You should set a vision for yourself about what your life would look like and the support you need in reaching those goals, and not to be afraid to ask for it. This is often referred to as self-advocacy or the ability to have people direct what is happening to them. In addition to these various tools, we will show you today life course tools, which can be used to help you build your employment trajectory. And those links will also be provided later on.
So on this slide, we're talking about a new path to employment. Traditionally, youth with significant disabilities might have been told that there are few options for services when exiting high school. They are encouraged to go into youth day programs or sheltered work without any real discussion about community employment being a possibility. Despite changing times and attitudes, some young adults are still being told this is their best opportunity. It's important to realize that all youth can work in the community. Transitioning from school to a segregated setting is not the best option. Putting together the right resources is the key to opening the door to integration. This means that we need to consider the right timing for each student to leave school setting. Again, in Michigan, unlike any other state in our nation, public school can, for a person who is in special education and receiving their school under an IEP or an individualized education plan, can receive that up to the age of 26. And that's different than any other state. This policy has a double-edged sword. While allowing for a longer use of school resources, it creates a prolonged segregated setting for young adults. Correcting this situation means that some students may choose to leave before the age of 26. So again, it should be person-centered. It should be that decision should be made in concert with the individual and their family and what makes sense in their individual life. This graphic shows a new path to employment for youth exiting high schools. It begins with high expectations from families and professionals, then leads to building skills and exploring careers. It highlights the need for youth to set a vision for themselves, and it moves into finding community supports that promote community-based employment, and then into meaningful work experiences, and finishes with a job in the community with or without supports. This next slide is talking about employment first. In the early 2000s, advocates and policymakers began discussing an employment philosophy for people with significant disabilities. They called it employment first. It was envisioned to counteract the overuse of sheltered work for people who could work in the community. Employment first simply advocates for competitive employment in community being the first option that is considered for employment. Employment first really advocates for that community-based. The majority of states, and now some have enacted some sort of employment first, policy or language that guides the way employment services are delivered in their state. Michigan's governor signed the Employment First executive order in 2015. So when we talk about employment, we want to make sure we all understand these same key terms. Individual, not in a group or enclave. Integrated, alongside those without disabilities, with opportunities to interact. And employment, the general workforce on the payroll of a business or self-employed. And minimum wage, at or above minimum wage or at industry standard wage. So when we're talking about employment, that's what we're saying under employment first. And throughout the rest of the presentation, that's the type of employment that we're talking about. Individualized, integrated, employment by the employer, and making minimum wage or more. So why should you work? We have attempted to lay the foundation for understanding the value of employment and how society is moving toward a greater employment opportunity, employment opportunities for people with disabilities. But it's also important to understand the benefits of employment for ourselves. Think about the benefit employment brings you. I'm going to ask a few people just to say, what do you think some of the benefits of employment? Is there anybody in the room that's employed? Raise your hand. Okay. What are some of those benefits? Value, worth.
Community.
I know with me, social security, disability, SSI.
Yeah. So that can be impacted by employment. We're going to talk a little later. We're not quite to that section yet, but we're going to talk about how a person can maintain those public benefits and have integrated, inclusive employment in the community as well. So we're going to talk about a lot of opportunities for that. What are the benefits? It's not just the money that's a benefit. We heard worth, value.
Community.
Jeff was saying community. Just that thought of having some place that you need to get up and go to each day, have people have expectations of you each day, are huge benefits to employment that we don't always think about. In American society, we tend to think about the money. It's all about the money. It's about a lot more than just the money when we're talking about employment.
It's about belonging and being a part of something bigger than yourself.
Absolutely. About belonging and being some part of something bigger than yourselves.
I guess another word would say is structure. It gives us structure. We all thrive better when we have some structure during our day.
Yeah. That structure is a big part. It becomes our routine, our daily routine. And, you know, even if just one piece of your daily routine is changed, think about how you feel. If you're a two-towel person in the shower, one for your hair, one for your body when you get out, and there's only one clean towel, how do you feel? Like one little change in the structure of your day can make a big impact on how the rest of your day goes. So you're absolutely right. Having that structure of I need to be at work at this time, I need to do these tasks, other people are counting on me, what I do or don't do is impacted by the next person, my colleagues that I work with, all of that is really important. So some of the benefits might include money for basic needs and recreation, opportunities to spend time doing something productive, a feeling of contributing to family and community, or the opportunity for additional social connections. People with disabilities experience those same benefits when they are employed in real jobs and getting paid real wages. In addition, working promotes mental health. Are there other benefits not listed on the slide and that we've already talked about? I see two hands up. Hang on, Jeannie, and then I'll call on you, Sarah. Go ahead, Jeannie. Purpose. Having a purpose in life. I mean, I can tell you, I entered the field that I've worked in for over 40 years now. So longer than some folks in the room have been alive, but we won't talk about that. Largely because I had a purpose in mind. I had a purpose to make life better for my Aunt Sharon, for my brother Kevin, and for my brother Roy. So working to benefit people with intellectual and developmental disabilities gave me real purpose in life. Sarah?
Another thing, when you start working and file taxes, it helps you to contribute your share of living.
Absolutely, Sarah. So a lot of people, you know, when you think about, oh, I'm paying taxes,
You're helping to pay.
you're contributing not just to you and your family, but to society as a whole. Great point to bring up.
I'd also add that for a lot of us it can be hope. That hope that comes with being a part of something, whether it's a job or a volunteer opportunity, whatever it is that you do. It allows you to kind of look outside yourself and kind of take that next step that you might not have taken otherwise.
Absolutely. Okay, we're on the next slide.
So this next slide is slide 13 for those that are following along numbers-wise. It is seeing yourself in a new way. So now that we are all on the same page with what it means, what we mean by employment, let's shift our focus to high expectations and beginning to see yourself as a member of the workforce. Next, we will discuss the importance of having high expectations for employment success and offer you some tools and stories to help the process.
Okay, so what are expectations? They're quick predictions about how much value someone contributes will add to the task at hand. And if the value of someone's contributions is predicted to be high, that person will receive more opportunities to contribute. That's not my quote. It's from Esther Quintero from 2014. So when I think about expectations and I look at my own family dynamics, so again, I grew up in a large Irish Catholic family. My brother Kevin adopted us later on. When I met him in high school, he decided he needed additional family when his father passed away, and then shortly after that, his mother. So he decided to adopt us. And we said, okay. When his mother was passing away, she asked my sister and I to be his sisters because she knew he needed some resources and some support. I already had an aunt with Down syndrome, and I had another brother who had a brain injury when I was still inside my mother. He's 2 years older than I am, so when he was 2, he had brain surgery, and this was in the 1960s. It's not as refined as it is these days. So he lived much of his life with a closed head injury. And so I was exposed to people with various types of disabilities at a very early age. And when I think of how expectations differed for all of those individuals, it's really kind of intriguing to me. Whether they were in special education or general education made a difference in what the expectations and what expectations were placed upon them. My brother Kevin grew up in special education, and expectations were that he would go to a sheltered workshop. My brother Roy was in general education and probably had more need for support than my brother Kevin, but he was put into regular education. He graduated, was expected to go to college, he entered the Marines, he got a degree. So things were very different in how people looked and the expectations they placed on them. And therefore, it changed the expectations they placed on themselves. And so from a bird's eye view, I've really seen how different expectations can change a person's life dramatically. So what do low expectations come from? They come from a long history and generations of myths and stereotypes perpetrated on people with disabilities. From early negative messages were received about people with disabilities. When I think of my Aunt Sharon being born in the late 1950s, my Swedish immigrant grandparents were told, the only good thing you can do is place her in an institution. That's what any good parent would do. And we know that things have changed since then, but having that a mindset of expectations for my aunt. Fortunately for my aunt, my Swedish grandfather with a very thick Swedish accent said, when he was told, you need to place her in an institution, you cannot take her home. He was also a very large man. He was on the Greco-Roman wrestling team for the Swedish national team. He was a very large man, and he just looked at the doctor after an hour conversation, stood up, looked at his wife and said, we'll be taking my daughter home now. And so my Aunt Sharon, unlike many people with Down syndrome in the 1960s, was raised with her family. And for many years, she continued to live with the family. So he was told from early on not to have any expectations for this daughter. He had 4 daughters. All of them he was expecting to go to college. And then he was told this when the last daughter was born. So again, when we think of low expectations and how that can really set a path for individuals that's different for those where high expectations are expected, it can really impact lifelong progress. A child might be placed in a separate educational setting based on their disabilities, such as the difference between my brother Roy and my brother Kevin, highlighting that they are different from other children. Our friends and family may try to be helpful by saying there's great programs for those type of people or those people with those needs. Again, we're automatically or initially setting a them and us kind of approach. With being bombarded with messages about can't or won't, It's no wonder expectations and are modified in a downward trajectory. The first step to combat this is recognizing the skills and talents of young adults and what they possess, and to begin setting a vision based on those and not what other people think or assume. Did the slide change? Yes. Okay, thank you. Why is it important to have and show high expectations for young adults with significant disabilities and what they will achieve? For starters, it will set a bar for how the rest of the world sees the youth. If we, as family members, and we as individuals express doubt that work is possible, that may be what others will believe as well. But if we convey that we expect young adults with disabilities to do what all adults are expected to do, then everyone is clear on the goal. We need to advocate against restrictive programs or placements. We need to be active in our community. We need to make plans to achieve our dreams. And we need to see that risk is good and failure can be, that risk is good and failure can be constructive. We all learn from mistakes we've made in life. High expectations are also important because they may lead to avoiding unnecessary restrictive options like sheltered workshop or day programs. These programs in and of themselves are not bad, but they are not an appropriate option for a person who can work in the community. Youth who have a high expectation set for themselves may also live lives as connected members of their community and have more opportunities to contribute to their community. Lives based on their own dreams and their own goals, and lives lived where risk and failure are not seen as catastrophic, but opportunities for growth. So, it's important to acknowledge the balancing act. We're asking of families and individuals and support systems. The reality is that they are expected to reconcile the fact that a young adult with a significant disability can achieve employment in other areas. This is often challenging when service systems put such an emphasis on severity of disability and less focus on finding the person's natural talents and skills. In the end, families and support systems are the keeper of the vision that employment is possible and must be balanced with the vision, with an impact of a young adult's disability. So again, it's this balancing act, understanding that a person has disabilities, what their own unique attributes and traits are, where they need support, and balancing that with the needs of the family and needs of society as well. So again, it's a balancing act, no different than any other young adult growing up.
So next up we have longer runway. So we all do things at our own pace, regardless of our differences. But society has certain artificially created milestones that it expects all young people to achieve as they move into adulthood. So for example, it is expected that a person will graduate high school at around the age of 18, go to college or get job training, find a job in their chosen field, start a family, and so on. But if you don't, that's okay. Different people take off at different times, and that's just a part of life. Some might need a longer runway or take an extended time to develop skills, certain skills to work and live in the community with or without supports, and that's also okay. You are not going nowhere just because you haven't fully arrived. Every step is worth celebrating, not just the end. Next up we have what is success? So if you could you name a few things that you might try and not be successful at it, or completely successful at it the first time? Does anybody have any ideas? Yeah.
Changing the tire on my car.
And I was thinking maybe learning a foreign language.
But think about it. I was successful at it until it fell off.
Yeah.
Then I was not so successful.
I was also successful this past weekend after a few attempts of putting a third wheel on my chair. It did not fall off. So there's that. Anyone else? That works.
An exercise program. Lots of people aren't successful at that the first time they try.
Success could also mean like, people, when people are fully included.
Yeah, sometimes your first attempt at being included in something isn't always successful.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So now let's consider the idea of success as it relates to youth and significant disabilities in employment. First off, success will always look very different for every individual. For one person, success might mean being able to go out and take public transportation to work for themselves. For another, it might mean working 5 hours a week or learning to fold towels. You'll know yourself better than anyone else and what you are capable of. And when you're doing or demonstrating new skills, success should be viewed based on seeing growth and not based off what everyone else can do. So the next up is a worksheet question. I can't really see it very well.
It's box 2 on the worksheet. What are you really good at?
Now,
So the youth changed it from the professional and family one to what is your greatest skill to what are you really good at? And so, again, when we're working with young adults, we'd ask them to do that. We'll ask you to identify what is your family member really good at? What is that one person we ask you to think about that you work with? What are they really good at? Just jot those things down. So really, when we talk about career exploration, we want to start with answering the questions on this box. Ready for the next one?
are we there?
Yep.
Okay. I can't see from this angle. So this next up is the positive personal profile or handout 2. It's pretty easy to get stuck on focusing on what we cannot do or that we forget to look for all the great things that we can. The field of disability employment is beginning to see the value in finding a person's positive traits and its relationship to finding a good job match. Focusing on the negative leads to employment decisions based on what a person can do. Finding the positive leads to employment decisions based on the skills and choice. One tool available to help see ourselves in a new way is called the Positive Personal Profile, or PPP. The PPP is a simple document that identifies a person's positive traits. It should be completed with input from families, teachers, or anyone else that knows you well, and of course yourself. It should be also shared with vocational rehab staff or work experience staff at the schools. Let's review what each box is asking for. So first up we have the dreams and goals sections. What do you want your life to look like? Answers don't have to be employment related or what others would consider realistic. What we want to know is what you hope for so we can begin setting solid goals to work towards. The second box we have is skills and knowledge. Do you have skills, real skills in a particular area? Are you good with computers, speaking another language? Can you cook? Know about restaurants because the family owns one? We are looking for a specific thing we can market to an employer. Next up we have learning style. How do you best learn new tasks? Do you learn those by watching, by doing, by hearing? This is important information since you will need new skills on the job. Next up we have interests and talents. What are you passionate about? How do you like to spend your time? Do you have any fun talents? You may not think these have anything to do with being employed, but they might. Next up we have positive personality traits. Are you friendly? Are you creative? Are you thoughtful or energetic? Do you love to learn new things? Or are you known for always landing lending a hand when something is needed. These are all traits that employers are looking for. Next up, we have values. A person's values can be a predictor of what type of job they would enjoy doing. For example, if a person values helping others, then a job at a food shelf or shelter or in a hospital might work. If you value taking care of the environment or being outdoors, then an outdoor recreation program or nature center would be a good fit. Next up, we have environmental preferences. We all have a preference in terms of environment in which we like to work. Some of us prefer to work outside, while others enjoy an office setting. Some youth may need a quiet environment, while others may like a fast-paced workplace. Next up, we have dislikes, quirks, and idiosyncrasies. We'll say that 3 times fast. To find a good job match, you need to know yourself through and through. What are your deal breakers? Do you dislike fluorescent lights or strange smells? Do you have a strong interest in specific things that may cause a distraction on the job? Do you have fears that people should be aware of? It all gets listed here. Next up, we have work experiences. Hold on. Sliding out of my chair. Technical difficulties. Good thing I have a seatbelt. Work experiences. Remember when we talked about how important work experiences were? This is where they get listed. Do you ever babysit or volunteer in the community? Did you ever have a paid job or help at their parents' businesses? Next up, we have support systems. Do you already have a county social worker or vocational rehabilitation counselor? Do you get waivered services? Is the family supportive and able to help with things like transportation? Next up, we have features. Once all these boxes are filled out above, the next step is fill out your features or the things you bring to the table that employers are looking for. This is where we begin painting the picture for your resume or interview. For example, after filling out the PPP, you might discover your features are computer skills, enjoying learning new things, interested in cars and semi-trucks, and had past work and experience volunteering at the library. Last but not least on this list, we have jobs to explore. Based on the features identified above, what are some of the jobs that might be a good fit for you? For example, someone with features we just mentioned might want to investigate working at a car dealership or trucking company doing computer inventory. It is important to identify potential jobs because this leads to action.
So on the next slide, unfortunately, Jeannie had to step out, but she is a person. Now she's like cursing me, I think, as she's leaving the door. Because this is her personal profile that she put together for herself. And Jeannie is one of our supported decision-making youth ambassadors. So throughout this presentation, we've tried to stress the importance of giving young adults with disability a voice and what they want in their adult lives and what they want those lives to look like. Living a dignified life includes being able to determine where you live, where you work, and who you spend time with. One way to do this is to develop a vision statement for yourself. So we actually go through this exercise with young adults when we teach this specifically to those groups. This slide provides an example of a vision statement. Jeannie Rowe from Cass County, Michigan. She lives in a very rural area of the state. She used a template found online to put together what she wants and hopes to accomplish with that job, her strengths, accomplishments, and areas where she needs help. She put this together herself with input from family and teachers. A vision statement like this can be used in many ways. It can act as the map or a rule book for anything that happens on your behalf. It can be presented during planning for an IEP meeting or a person-centered planning meeting to make sure that your voice is heard. It also can be modified as priorities and goals change, just like they tend to for all of us. So we have link, and that's on the conference website with an example and a blank of a personal profile. So you can pull those off the conference website and begin using those right away with some of the folks that you work with, or for yourself, or for a loved one. The next thing we want to do is show you what all we're talking about really looks like. So we're going to play a short video. This was put together using Employment First funding that came to the state, as we described earlier. And this kind of shows families all here in Michigan and kind of their experiences. We use this when we do the family engagement training. Sarah, did you have a quick question before we play the video?
No, but I thought I saw an article a while back about Hawaii signing Employment First bill.
Yep, Hawaii was one of the latest states to sign on to Employment First. Okay, so let's watch this video. Hopefully it will play.
I'm sorry, Mary.
Okay, you might have to play it from back there.
I always walked away from appointments feeling downtrodden. They told us
Are you hearing
that
it?
he might not
I always
speak.
walked away from appointments feeling downtrodden. They told us that he might not speak. They didn't give a lot of hope as to what his capabilities would be, or that there was a possibility that he would be able to do more than anything than sitting in a corner waiting for an SSI check. And at 2-3 years old, you just aren't able to see the full potential yet. You really can't see what's in there.
They never really even said much before about what he was going to be capable of, because I don't think they honestly knew.
Corey couldn't talk, he couldn't express himself, and he would beat his head against the wall sometimes. He didn't know, and I didn't know really how to handle this because I didn't understand what was going on with him. He was diagnosed at age 5 with autism, and at that time they didn't know a lot about autism. The answers the doctor had was medication. I just couldn't believe this was all that he had, was to medicate him and watch him sit somewhere idly and be alone,
Well, prior to the diagnosis, I wanted what every parent wanted. I wanted a successful young individual who was a benefit to society. Since the diagnosis, I want him to be able to achieve everything that he's capable of learning, and I want him to be able to survive in this world after we're gone.
A lot of parents that we've worked with have had concerns about maybe young adults going out into the world and working for the first time. And it's an understandable fear. It's tough to get out of your comfort zone when you've had your young adults in your care and used to your routine of them going to school. But I haven't met a parent yet who's regretted taking that first step into employment and encouraging their young adults to get that job and work hard to keep it.
I was really hesitant about him working in the community. I was afraid that people were going to make fun of him. Is he going to have a seizure at work? Or is people going to understand what his disabilities really are?
In the beginning, I would take him, I'm riding the bus with him every day. I'm taking him there, and I'm coming back home. I'm going there in the evening time, and I'm coming back home.
One of their biggest fears is safety. Will they be treated differently? Will they be discriminated against? How are they going to get there? This is the first step that we need to do, is to break those barriers, to get folks included in the community and just be part.
We can get him a mobility coach. What's a mobility coach? I say, well, they will train him and teach him how to ride the bus independently. And my way of thinking was, what? They want me to turn my baby loose out here? He's so trusted, he's vulnerable. So, yes, that was a big challenge for me. But what I had to do was take a leap of faith. And I had to make the decision, say, look, this is what you want for him. You want him to function independently. So you got to step back. And you got to have faith and trust. And I did. It took some doing, but I did it.
I think one of the main fears that I come across is people being concerned about their benefits. And so we make sure with our supported employment program to connect them with someone who is an expert in benefits counseling, so that we can help educate them that actually going to work is a financially good option, and that it's going to be beneficial for them financially, not just for our person, but for the family as well. Sitting down and talking about the budget, talking about what that SSI check is going to look like if they're working part-time, if they're working full-time, what does that look like? If they're on SDI or SSDI? What does that look like? How does that pan out 3 months from now if they're working full-time? What does their Medicaid look like, if they're working full-time? And kind of overcoming some of those fears, because guardians and family members are rightfully concerned to want to financially take care of their person with a disability. Once we can all be on the same page and be like, yes, we want this person to financially succeed, let's see what the numbers pan out to. What does that actually look like?
I think him earning a check helps him to learn how to pay bills, how to manage his money so that his money lasts from one check to the next, budget out for his basic needs, his toiletry needs and things like that, clothing, his love of shoes. I mean, the basic things that you kind of expect from a teenager, even though he's an adult, but where he's at, it's kind of still like having a teenager in the house.
The challenges with employers, it kind of runs the gamut. It could be that maybe they just don't have a position that fits that participant at the time. Sometimes it is preconceptions of what a person can or cannot do, whether those preconceptions are justified or not. The way we overcome those challenges is just by showing up and convincing the employer that this person is worthy of taking a chance. Just like you were afforded and I was afforded. Like in the case of Corey, there were some initial doubts when he first started at Kroger, and now Corey has a history of proving all those doubts wrong.
When Corey first came to Kroger's, he had a job coach with him, and he actually did cleaning for us. He did quite well, but he really wanted to be a courtesy clerk. We slowly transitioned him into that role. Just because you have a disability doesn't mean you can't work. And when you hire someone with a disability, you have to see what their strengths are and work with that. And I think that they're worth our time and training. It takes a little longer to train them, but I think it's really worth our while doing this.
I've come across a lot of employers that are concerned about liability. They're concerned that my person might not be able to keep up with the pace in the workplace as much as the other employees. Just like general concern about disability and not knowing how to talk about it. And so I find that it's helpful to just throw things out with employers that they might feel uncomfortable to talk about and be like, yeah, okay, so I can help with the computer piece of things if they have to do training, or if they need a job coach there, these are things that the job coach can help with, and this is how liability works, since everyone wants to talk about liability. And just kind of giving them examples of other people who are working usually helps put employers at ease, and okay, maybe you could give this person a call and talk to them about what are the hurdles that they've had to overcome with hiring someone with a disability. And I think it's also helpful in my conversations with employers to connect them to resources, like if they're concerned about ADA compliance and stuff, to connect them to the resources that can help them make sure that they're being welcoming to everyone. And it works out best when I can find out what somebody's specific skill set is and then pair that exactly with what that employer is looking for. And those are the best mashups that we find, and those are the best job placements.
Well, Elizabeth had come in and told me that she had a client that had lost their job, and they asked me if there was anything she could do. I had her come in and we had her start doing dishes. She learned how to work the dish machine. We explained it to her. She's learned all that. I try to break it up a little bit, always give her something different to do. I think it's positive for her and for us as a community to have her out and about. I don't think because she has a type of disability, I don't think she should not work. I think giving anybody a chance, you just got to find what works for them. It may not be something I can do every day, but I can find something for her to do every day.
Jobs are important for everybody. These are folks that want to work. They have goals, they have dreams, they have strengths, and they have weaknesses just like anybody else. And so it's important to get them out there and find the right match for them.
Anthony runs our garden center in the summer for us and makes sure everything stays watered and the garden center is clean and neat. Each day I see Anthony in the store. Brightens my day a little bit because he's always so happy to be here and eager to get to work. I think anyone that's able to help out in the community or get a job that really works with the community should. Everyone I've ever worked with, they might have some type of disability, always makes up for it with a can-do attitude and the willingness to do whatever it takes to get the job done.
He's a lot more mature now. He's a lot more confident when he goes on to these new job positions. He's not intimidated by the new environments. He's not intimidated by meeting new people or working with new people. He jumps right in with 100% bravery and just master the task.
Don't be afraid to take a step out there into something that might be a little bit uncomfortable, might be a little unknown. There might be a lot of new agency names that you don't know exactly who's doing what, that it's worth it to take a chance ask the questions, you won't know what the resources are that are available. And there are tons of resources out there for people who are looking for work. And don't be afraid to take a risk and try something new.
This is what I say. Don't let fear get the best of you. Go for it. Do not be afraid to go look for a job. Go for the job that you want in life. Go for it.
We talk a lot about it as providers, like the things that we can do for the consumer, the services that we provide. But I think one thing that we tend to overlook sometimes is the recruitment of families in that effort. Our best success stories have always been the ones where the family has been 100% on board, has been completely involved from start to finish. We all need to do a better job of recruiting family members to be on board with supporting our consumers in community placement and employment. That's the most surefire way to success for them.
I'm grateful. I don't have the same worries that I once had. I used to wonder what would happen to Corey if something ever happens to me. And I can see him being independent and taking care of himself. He's learning how to manage money, but he's learned better how to spend it. Okay. He's good at spending it, okay? He loves to spend money. But I can see him being able to take care of himself. And that has put my mind at rest. I've seen a lot of growth in him. His social skills have increased tremendously. I see him initiate conversations, whereas there was a time when even if someone had a conversation with him, he would just look at him like, who are you talking to? And what you talking about, you know? And that has changed tremendously. So yes, I see light at the end of the tunnel, bright light.
Don't look at them, don't talk to them and hear the limitation in their ability to verbally communicate and think that that's the only way that they can mentally function. The only limitation that's on them is the one that you place on them. So let them try. Even if they fail, let them try.
One of the most dignifying things that as a community we can support each other with is to give someone a paycheck, because it says that you're valuable and that your work is valuable and that you're an asset to our community. And so giving someone a paycheck can be like the most meaningful, dignifying thing, way better than any handout or any program, is if someone's earned it themselves and they get their own paycheck. But beyond that also, I think it's really valuable as a community for us to be having people with disabilities like part of our workforce, because not only does that give that person with a disability an opportunity to work and have a paycheck, it also says something about that business, and then other people are like, oh, Leah works at Main Street, that's a place where I can also feel welcome. So when people with disabilities are out and visible in our community, it makes their otherness not so much a big deal. It's like we're all together, we all have things that make us different, so it makes our community a more welcoming space when we have people with disabilities in the workforce, just visible in the community, going out to lunch, being seen at the shopping mall, being employed. It says that we're all worth it and that we all have something different to contribute no matter what our differences might be.
My goal is to stay a job and be responsible for myself and do good things. You know? Be friendly, stay calm and stay focused, and never give up.
There are programs, there are avenues that you can take, and you just have to be open-minded, be trusting, and want this, because they can be successful. Corey's a prime example. He's been at Kroger for over 3.5 years now. I didn't think that was possible. As I tell him, it's just the beginning. There are still greater things if you just keep focused, keep trying, and never give up.
Okay, as we go on to the next slide. I have to catch up here. As we go into this next slide, I just want to take a brief moment. We don't have much time. I know we need to finish up at 2:30. But it's just a brief moment. What were your thoughts about the video that you saw? Anyone? Inspiring? Yeah. Yeah, You need to help that person build social capital and build a circle of support. So in the example of Kevin, my brother, I'm not biologically related to him. He just built social capital with my family throughout the years. My sister and I, one of my sisters and I both work in the field of rehabilitation, so that was a natural process for us. We were there when his mother passed away, and she asked us, I'm not sure she really asked us. She just told us, you're going to be his sisters now, and I expect you to take care of him. And we were like, well, I don't know. We expect our brothers to take care of us. And she looked at him and said, you're their brother now, and I expect you to take care of them. And so ever since then, he's been part of our family. And so he's developed that circle of support. He develops the circle of support where he works, where he has a place of worship, where he attends church, where he gets involved in his community and volunteering. All of that builds social capitals, and those are individuals that can become like family or fill in for that role, that family members. He has 6 biological brothers. None of them have seen him in the last 10 years. And before that, it was maybe once or twice a year. So we've had to help him build his circle of supporters in his local area. And that's true for lots of people. Family is who you determine is your family. And as my son said at age 7, when he finally realized that Kevin wasn't biologically related to him, at a conversation at a Thanksgiving dinner, he was like, wait, what? He's not related? And so the conversation started with diabetes runs in our family, and Kevin got concerned and said, am I going to get diabetes? And my oldest brother was trying to explain to he, and my son was sitting next to him, that he didn't have a higher probability of having diabetes because he wasn't biologically related. And then I realized my son didn't know that he'd been calling him Uncle Kevin ever since he could remember, and he just assumed he was my brother, my biological brother. And so we all had kind of a chuckle about that. And so, it really is who your chosen family is. And it may be somebody you choose and say they're my family. Your chosen family may be your circle of closest friends. It may be a circle of colleagues at work. It may be a certain circle of people from your place of worship. So it's whoever you choose as family. And for those who don't have that biological family, they can create it in any of those locations. So it's also a case for inclusion. The more things you're included in your community, the more likely you are to build that social capital and to build those circles of supporters. So that's how I'd answer that. All right, next slide. So the power of work experience. One of the strongest predictors of employment success for adults with disabilities is having meaningful work experiences while they're still in high school. And that's why we're going to talk in a little bit about some new youth initiatives that we have that allow young adults as young as 14, 15, 16 years of age to start having those first work experiences. I can tell you I started back I was, I think, younger than 16. I had to have a work permit signed, working at the Dexter A&W in a hideous orange uniform, bright orange uniform. But that was my first job. How did I get that job? Because I built social capital. My father's best friend owned the A&W, so every Sheehan in the Sheehan clan had their stint at working at the Dexter A&W because we had that social capital. So again, helping people with disabilities to build social capital can be huge. One new person in your life could be that key to helping getting you involved in lots of different things. So think about that in your loved one's life, and think about that in other people, your community's life. Maybe you're going to be that one person to help somebody make those connections. So that can all be critical. Things like informational interviewing, job shadowing, volunteering, internships, paid entry-level jobs, all of that's critical. Working at the Dexter A&W, my first job with a paycheck beyond babysitting, wasn't my dream job, I will just tell you that. It was a hideous, truly hideous orange uniform, and I often came home smelling like French fries. Not a bad thing when you're hungry, but not a hot thing on a date, you don't want to smell like French fries.
I don't know, maybe.
So it might work for Jeff. Didn't work for me. But it gave me the money I needed to go to college to get the type of job that I wanted. So again, we talk to young adults about that first experience. May not be your final experience, but once you get in the door and you build that social capital and build that resume, it can lead to that career of your choice. Okay, this next slide, Jeff.
So one thing I want to mention real quick before we move on, because I think it's important, the things that Mary mentioned just now about like the outside connections that become family and like the importance of job shadowing and things. I want to point out that I volunteered initially at Disability Network West Michigan. I had no prior work experience before that, but I began volunteering, and volunteering led to like I did like job training, so I did on-the-job experience for roughly 80 hours. So it was like a trial work period where I kind of got accustomed to the working environment and things like that. And it kind of gave me the opportunity to work with a safety net. And I was eventually hired at Disability Network, which is where I am today. And also those outside connections who become family. There's one over there for me who was actually the person that worked on that just stuck her tongue out at me. Because she was actually, at the time when I was employed, she was an employment navigator, I believe, I think. Now is a program manager, but it's just that connection that becomes family, because I don't have a lot of biological family support, and I also lost my mom in the middle of this process. So there's a second one, and that's how that whole process can evolve. And so that's just how important that is. And I just wanted to mention that before we move on.
Well, and I think that's a good thing to mention. So one opportunity led to other opportunities, because Amanda and I work on several youth projects together. When I was looking for somebody to co-present with me, she was like, oh, how about Jeff? And we started talking about it. Jeff and I had only met on video when we got together to put this presentation together once. And so because of one contact, because of one piece of social capital, it created a new opportunity. And while you were gone, Amanda, Jeff was like, hey, do you have other presentations I could help you out with? So I'm not done with Jeff yet, and I don't think Jeff's done with me yet. So he's now built a second level from that one social capital. So we're going to move on to the next slide, just because we have quite a few left, and we need to finish up on time.
So this slide is titled Using Your Networks. So families may feel intimidated by the prospect of helping their youth find work experience. One effective way to support your loved one is to use personal networks to find opportunities for youth to work or learn about careers they are interested in. The term personal network may sound formal, and I'm falling out of my chair. May sound formal, but the fact that everyone has a network of people they know. They include friends, neighbors, coworkers, places you do business, and extended family. All these people have networks of their own, people who may know somebody who works in the field the youth is interested in. Consider this example. A youth is interested in working with animals and maybe even becoming a veterinarian someday. The youth's mom doesn't personally know anyone who works in that field, so she asked her book club friends if they had any contact. Ends up a friend's brother-in-law is a veterinarian. He was contacted and agreed to an informational interview. The interview went so well that he invited the youth to shadow him on the job for the day. The experience was so energizing that the youth now is building skills to become a vet tech, and someday would like to become a veterinarian himself.
So again, I say you never know what that next piece, that next level of social capital will bring. So building responsibility, things at an early age that families can do, having chores, schoolwork, soft skills, like speaking up, looking people in the eye, a firm handshake at the interview, all of those kind of things can be pieces that families can work on at a very young age. It's okay for young people to take risk and kind of have that understanding of taking those risks while you're still there as a safeguard as parents, and to experience failures and what those failures bring in their life and how they can learn from those experiences. The goal is to have them give a good effort. So these are things that, again, families can think about at a very early age. School and employment. Special education programs are responsible for helping young adults prepare for transition or the process of moving from school to employment, continuing education, or training after high school, as well as independent living. Over the past several years, new laws have been put into place to assist and encourage agencies to help young adults with disabilities overcome the barriers of employment. That individualized education plan, or IEP, is the outline of programming if a student qualifies for special education services. Once a youth turns 14, the IEP should include goals related to the student's interests as they look at transition that we talked about. Those goals should include career exploration, building functional work and work readiness skills like math, technology use, communications, etc., and providing work experiences. So there's new rules that schools are held to really start this process at a much earlier age than before. So I'm going to zoom past a couple of slides here, Jeff, if you don't mind. Okay. This is just, we want to kind of discuss some of those concerns. And so when we look at this form, again, and we look at, whoops, I went too far ahead there. We look at this form. One of the next thing is, what is your greatest concern when thinking about employment for that individual or yourself or that loved one? So we ask people to fill those out. So think about that while we're moving to this next slide. And I have to catch my laptop up to us. So I want to go through myths about employment, and then we're going to get to Sarah's question. When considering employment in the community, we want to make sure individuals and their support systems have factual information so informed decisions can be made. Unfortunately, incorrect information can exist based on old beliefs about what people with disabilities can and cannot do. These myths can hold young adults back from imagining their futures. So people with disabilities don't work fast enough. Untrue. It's been scientifically unproven. Employees with disabilities won't be accepted by coworkers. Untrue. We have many situations where we can point to this being untrue. Sheltered workshop is safer than community jobs. This is also untrue. We can look at insurance statistics and determine that this is untrue. Workman's comp claims, we can prove that this is untrue. People who leave workshop lose their friends. We've proven that this is untrue. My brother is a prime example of that. He has a large circle of friends. And most recently, a significant other that he met not when he was in a sheltered workshop, but when he was in the community. People with significant disabilities don't need work. We talked earlier about again, this is a myth. These are all myths about people with disabilities and employment. We know that there's much more than just that paycheck that's important to people, all people. And so people with disabilities are no different. So this next slide is talking about what Sarah brought up. There are a number of myths out there about working and receiving Social Security benefits. Getting students on SSI will take care of everything. So many people still believe that. There was a time too long ago when young adults were strongly encouraged to get Social Security benefits like SSI, and that was how they were going to survive their whole life. Well, anybody who knows what the current SSI rate is, it's living at or below the poverty level. So it's not like you're going to be living high on the hog. It's not the life most people plan for themselves, or if asked what their trajectory is something that they want. The other myth with this is that if they work, then they'll lose those public benefits, and people see those public benefits as a safeguard. We have a whole video. We're not going to show the whole video because we just would not have time. So I'm going to progress to this next slide in a moment. And we'll just talk about where you can get this in the previous video that we saw. So people can live independently in the community and have work and have a Social Security check as well. There are many people in Michigan living in that situation. So I'm going to ask the gentleman in the back to play just the first part of the video to the title, so you know what you're looking for.
Employment and public benefits.
Okay, stop it there. Pause. So it went back to the previous, or the next slide. So it's called the intersection of employment and public benefits. Although now I'm thinking it might be the other way around. Intersection of public benefits and employment, one or the other. You can get both of these videos if you want to share them with your colleagues, or as a family member, if you want to share that with other families, at the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council website. We're going to put that on the last slide, so you'll know you can just click on that. If you pull the PowerPoint, you scan your QR code, go to the handouts for the conference, and then you can go and just click on those links once you print it out or on your computer. You can click on those links and it'll take you right to DD Council's website, and both of these videos are available under the Employment tab, okay? So on that video, it is a CWIC. It's Kathy McRae, who works for ARC Michigan. A CWIC is somebody who's a certified work incentives counselor, and we had part of the Employment First funds went to helping her do that video, where she talks about Social Security benefits and employment. And she actually has templates that you can use. You can pull right from the video and download and kind of show, if you make this much money in public benefits and you work 10 hours a week, how would that affect your benefits? And she'll show in the end how maybe one of your benefits goes down a little bit, but that combined with the employment is more than what you were making before. And so it helps people to have factual information about that, because again, it's a myth that if you work, you're going to lose your public benefits. That's not true. My brother for years worked at Myers and had public benefits and a paycheck from Myers and sometimes gifts from his bratty little sister. So he had lots of income coming from lots of different areas. And there's lots of ways you can put money aside now that weren't available before. I see a question. Pardon me? Did your brother live at home at the time, or was he out Both. He lived with family for a period of time when he worked for Myers, and then he moved out into his own apartment. When my daughter lived home and worked, her SSI was cut tremendously. Yeah. So I was wondering if living on our own makes a difference. It does. So once a person becomes 18, they become a household of their own. And so sometimes it's how you fill out the paperwork. So Social Security considers them an independent part of the household. And so as long as they're paying equal expenses, so you take your mortgage or your rent and you divide it up between the number of people living there, if they're paying that, so as a family person, if they pay it to their parents and their parents turn around and give it back to them, as long as there's that paper trail, that's the important part for Social Security. They're paying their fair share of expenses as an independent adult. And so that can impact the amount that they get in benefits. But I am not a CWIC, so I would really encourage you and others who are interested in knowing more about the ins and outs of all of that is to get that video. CWICs are trained through the WIPA program, which is Work Incentives Planning. I can't remember what the A is for. Assistance, planning and assistance. And so the WIPA program, we have brochures and we cite that at the end of the presentation. You can also get a WIPA brochure and it has every county in Michigan and who the WIPA organization is that covers your county. You can have an individual meeting with a CWIC like Kathy, and they can help you work through the specifics of your situation. I have got two questions. I'm going to start over here.
You can also get benefit to work coaching through CMH now as well.
Yeah, many CMHs do have that. And so there's lots of ways you can get factual information. And many CMHs have a benefits counselor that works right there directly for them. They're called different things at different CMHs. And they'll do the same thing. They'll sit down with you like, okay, your son or daughter works making this amount. Here's what they make in SSI or SSDI, and really calculate that specifically out.
Okay, so I letter, you get it in writing. You don't ask your friend, you don't see who else gets comparatively. You get a benefits letter in writing, you get it from the horse's mouth, then you know how much you can work, how much you can earn per month.
Right. And another myth that many people have about working and people with disabilities and benefits is that you can't have more than $2,000 in the bank. So if they make more than $2,000, what are you going to do with that money? You have to spend it very quickly. Well, first, Social Security has a time frame by which it has to be spent. So in the example, when my brother's mother passed away, she left money to him. So he has a large chunk of money, and we had to figure out, that employment, benefits, inheritance, how that's all going to work. There's lots of things like special needs trust, pooled or individual trust, My Able accounts, where people can put money aside now. And so the WIPA program talks about that, and we're going to show a little bit more when we have the links about My Able accounts. And DD Council provides training on My Able accounts as well. We use Scott DeVerona from the Treasury Department here in Michigan. He just did one yesterday for us. So if that's a thing you want more information on, we're happy to provide that for you. Okay, one last question before we move on. Go ahead, Sarah.
Can Kathy shed some light on the ABLE accounts or not?
Kathy knows about My Able accounts, but I like to go, as this gentleman said, to the horse's mouth. The Treasury Department runs My Able accounts, and so Scott DeVerone has been part of it since the onset of My Able accounts in Michigan, so that's who we have talk about My Able accounts. So we have a whole hour-and-a-half presentation that he can come to organizations and do. I can answer basic questions because my brother happens to have a My Able account, but again, I'm not a CWIC. My background's more in psychology. Go ahead. Yes, but I can tell you my brother often has more money in his savings than I do. So it's not something you really have to worry about. They can only have one My Able account, but they can have a My Able account and a special needs trust. So people can have literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings. But take it from the horse's mouth. Maybe come to one of those presentations from Scott. I'm not a lawyer either or a financial consultant by any means, so we'd want you to get information directly from them. So here, we would have individuals fill out that next section. Okay, but we're going to move on. And let me catch up here on my computer, because we just have a few brief minutes left. So this next section, Jeff, you want to announce it very quickly?
Sure. The next slide is action steps, so getting started.
What we really want you to do is think about moving forward, and usually when we have more time, when we do this more as a workshop, we would actually spend some time here and have each person think about, on behalf of your loved one or yourself, or if you're a professional here, somebody that you work with for your profession, what are 3 action steps you're going to take to help get that person employed in the next week or once you leave here today? So again, this blank form is on the conference website. You can pull that down and download it. I do want to talk very briefly about some takeaways. Jeff's going to talk about that, and then I'm going to talk just about a couple initiatives and show you where all those resources are.
So the brief point of the takeaway slide, have expectations for yourself and set a goal that includes employment. Recognize what strengths and interests are when you think about employment. Recognize what you need to work on and then address it. Don't be afraid to ask friends and family members in ways that you need support. And lastly, we hope all of you that attended this workshop found the information useful and inspiring. The intention was to answer some of the key questions, show success stories, and instill the idea that employment is still possible for young adults with disabilities.
All right, this next slide is just talking about a couple opportunities available even yet this summer. We are recruiting Amanda, who had to leave moment. Everyone leaves right at the most opportune times. So Amanda and I are working on the YAY program, which is Youth Employment Ambassador Host. So we have 4 that we trained last summer. We will be training up to 6 more this summer, so it doesn't matter where you live in the state. It begins on June 19th and ends on July 14th, so there's multiple hours of training per day. You can get the flyer. You can grab my business card or my contact information off the last slide. If you call me about becoming a youth employment ambassador host. Oh, we also have supported decision-making ambassadors. That's why I'm stumbling over my tongue here. That's an opportunity that's still available. The applications are still open for that right now. This next slide shows 2 different boot camps. I don't like the idea of using the phrase summer camp when we're talking to adults, because summer camps are for kids. These are boot camps. Trust me, it's all employment all the time. So we spend a week. We're having 2 camps this year. One in the MTSA, Michigan Transition Service Association Region 1, which is kind of, if you're looking at Michigan, it's the fingers, clear to the bridge area. And then Region 5 in August, which is the whole second hand, the UP. So we're doing 1 camp in Clare and 1 camp in Marquette. This year, it's a week-long camp where the young adults come and stay at the hotel. It's employment, pre-ed skills in the morning. In the afternoon, they go out to jobs in the community and try out jobs based on their interest that they specified in their application. And then they come back exhausted by 8 hours of work, and we make them work some more. So we have presentations in the evening. Our goal, as an old lady as I am, is to tire them out before I do. And by 10 o'clock at night, they're begging us to go to their hotel rooms and go to sleep. And we're like, oh, we're going to have a pool party. And they're like, yeah, no, we're going to bed. You guys, you old people can go do whatever you want. And so it's really like boot camp because it's all employment all the time. So those 2 are available. Then these last couple slides are all the links. Again, you can print this off the conference website. Whoops, I didn't catch this one up. Are all the links. You can pull those right from the conference website and then click on those, and all of those links take you to the commercials that the state put together, the videos that we talked about. All of that is linked right there. We're going to go past the next slide because we opted out of doing an evaluation, and we're going to take the next few minutes and answer whatever questions that you have. I know we're at time right now. 2 minutes over. I'm going to put our contact information up there. So Jeff and I will stick around for a few minutes if you have any additional questions. Oh, and our out number is, thank you for the reminder, 1717. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I think I heard a question forming. Okay.
So I heard you say sheltered versus competitive. So I use different language, or maybe that has to do with sheltered as piecework. But the CMH, we often use, at least this is with adults now, okay? So we use supportive employment. I contract with MRS, Michigan Rehab Services, and we use the term competitive. And then there's another one that just kind of blows my mind away, and it says supportive competitive employment. And that I'm just totally confused at.
Okay.
If you have any insight as where we've come from that.
Okay. So a sheltered workshop could be making piece rate, or sometimes, because there is a big thrust with Employment First to do away with sub-minimum wage, so some sheltered workshops are paying minimum wage or more. But that's why we clarified in the very beginning what we were talking about employment is employment. It has to be in the community, so not in a sheltered workshop. It has to be making minimum wage or more. People who work there, it could be a job open to any of us. So it's not a job only specifically for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So all of those things that we talked about in the beginning define what we're talking about by employment or inclusive integrated employment in the community, making minimum wage or more. So lots of people around the state use lots of different terms. So somebody could be in a workshop and making over minimum wage, but it's still a workshop. It's only available to people with disabilities. So that doesn't qualify under the definition for, community employment under Employment First. And then what was the other part of what you said? In the community. So supported inclusive employment. That would be somebody who's working at a job in the community, but they still receive some supports. So just because I'm working at an inclusive job in the community and I'm making more than minimum wage and I can interact with my colleagues and my fellow employees doesn't mean that I might not have a job coach. So the job is still supported in some way, but it's in the community and it meets those other qualifications. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
A little bit more? Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I was interested in your second objective that said describe various agencies which support placement into employment. Is there a list somewhere? My daughter's worked with 2
Okay.
different types of agencies very successfully.
Yeah, there's lots of different organizations that work with employment. MRS, Michigan Rehabilitative Services, Michigan Works, DD Council, with our work with youth and employment. If you contact me, I can give you a more inclusive list or more extensive list. We have Bureau of Services for blind persons who work specifically with individuals with vision impairments. We have Low Incidence who work specifically with individuals with hearing impairments or who are deaf. And so there's lots of different organizations. Some of them only work with a certain niche in the population. Others work with all individuals with IDD. So if you contact me individually, I can give you a more extensive list. Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, again, thank you, and sorry we went a few minutes over there.